Conference on Environmental Peacebuilding. My name is James Borton, a non-resident senior fellow at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, the Foreign Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., and the moderator for today's meeting. The title of today's session is Blue Parks Offer a Promising Model for Peace Building in Transboundary Water Issues. Certainly, we are now living in dangerous and deeply divided times, and our oceans are at a tipping point. From the bleached coral reefs, the fishery collapses, to the plastic garbage patches, it's evident that our oceans are in crisis. This is the ocean's decade, and areas in the ocean are being set aside as sanctuaries for the same reason that parks were created on land, to protect habitats, organisms, resources. These ocean sanctuaries are often called marine protected areas or blue parks. And despite the progress made in the past decade to create these MPAs, the spread and coverage are falling short of the targets set by international organizations. But what we do know is that these areas are widely recognized as an effective management tool for promoting biodiversity conservation and contributing to regional science cooperation, despite the conflicts over marine resources. So today, I hope we will dive deeply into the subject of marine protected areas and their aspirations. And the goal is to address the challenges of balancing the ecological, the climate, and the biodiversity objectives within existing policies that span across national boundaries. Today, I'm joined by a stellar lineup of experts to speak to the promise of MPAs in addressing transboundary marine conservation. So let me begin by introducing our speakers, and following the introduction, each of them will present a brief overview of their experience and the regions where this peace-building model is evident. Let me begin with Dr. Saleem Ali, who holds a PhD in environmental policy and planning, and is the current chair of the Department of Geography and Spatial Science, and is the Blue and Gold Star Distinguished Professor of Energy and Environment at the University of Delaware. He is also the author of many books, including Earthly Order, How Natural Laws Define Human Life. Dr. Peter Mackelworth is the Conservation Director of Blue World Institute of Marine Research and Conservation in Croatia. And he'll offer his expertise as a social scientist and conservation biologist in marine policy. Dr. Vu Hai Dong is a researcher at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam and the author of numerous articles on network marine protected areas in the South China Sea. And Dr. Maoz is the distinguished professor at the Hebrew University at the Alexander Silberman Institute of Life Science and a specialist in coral reefs and environmental change, and presents a unique perspective on the Red Sea. Dr. Saleem Ali, let's lead off with you and your extensive work in peace building, since it is closely associated with conflict resolution where the natural environment is under threat. Dr. Ali?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Borton, for the invitation. And I'm delighted to convene under the auspices of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association because I have immense regard for this organization and followed their work since its genesis, more or less. So I would like to just kick off by saying that my foray into this space started in basically when I was a PhD student at MIT with Larry Susskind, who was my dissertation advisor and is a well-known environmental mediator. And even though my own research interest was on environmental conflicts around extractive industries, I soon became aware, both at a professional and personal level, that a lot of these kinds of structural issues around conflict and conflict resolution involving natural resources should be applied also in transboundary contexts. And when I talk about transboundary, I'm particularly speaking to international boundaries, which are contested at times and are also not governed as they should be to have the most optimal outcomes in terms of environmental concerns. And so I became involved in a project to get together scholars and put together the first academic anthology on peace parks. And that was published in 2007 by MIT Press, and it's still around. And it's been quite refreshing to see the attention it got. I didn't expect it. I was a junior scholar, just brought together professionals from all over. But we did have people who were not just academics, but also people from the military who contributed to that volume, including my own country of origin is Pakistan. And I was especially keen to get people from the Indian and the Pakistani military to come together and collaborate on a chapter. And we were able to even have that, which seems quite unlikely in many ways. But there was a chapter that focused on the Siachen conflict between India and Pakistan, which in some ways you can say is a blue park potential because it's in a glacial area. It's frozen blue park, but it certainly got attention. And even at the time, the US government supported this kind of effort at what they call joint cooperation and monitoring in the Army lexicon. And there's a center at Sandia National Labs in New Mexico, which focuses on this kind of approach. And they brought together these military officials and funded them for several months to work together on a potential approach to resolving the conflict using environmental means. So, this is not something which is just in the ivory tower setting. It is something that can be approached if we just have the intellectual leadership within the military and within public policy circles. It can be approached in that way. So, so I have been working in this space from that dimension. And I think the most interesting efforts that are underway are around trying to use environmental issues and particularly water as a means of instrumentally resolving conflict. There are other what I call soft peace park approaches, which are much more around cooperation between countries that are already on very friendly terms. So as you might know, the world's first peace park is Borton Glacier International Peace Park, in terms of one that is internationally recognized as a peace park. And in this case, it goes back to the 1930s. It was established through an effort from Rotary International members in both Canada and the US. And they were able to have an act of parliament and an act of Congress passed in both countries to establish this as a peace park. And it is also a blue park in some ways because there's Waterton Lake right in the middle, and it's shared by both countries. But I don't consider it in the same light as an instrumental peace park that we are engaging in here, where there is a contestation of the use of the resource and a territorial dispute, and you're using it to resolve that. So that's what I think we should be focusing on. And I'll just share some of the recent work that I've been involved in. Is about particularly, again, going back to India and Pakistan, is around the ways in which we could resolve a dispute arising from actually British colonial times that was even before India and Pakistan were created as countries as we know them now. But it still persists, and that's a maritime dispute and very much a blue park kind of situation. And that is around this part of the Indus Delta, which is called Sir Creek. And so here you've got the border that is contested because, from an environmental point of view, a very ridiculous situation, because one country says that the border should be on the banks of the creek, and the other says it should be in the middle of the creek. And it goes back to these historical documents from British colonial times, and when these were princely states, essentially. And from an environmental point of view, it's ridiculous because, as you know, a delta is dynamic. So it's not stuck in one place, it's constantly moving, and even within a lifetime, you could have channels which are going to shift and so on. So, it's clearly an example of where environmental science and conservation science do not intersect with political decision making. And so what we have been proposing here is that there should be a call to both countries to basically go back to their obligations under the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands Protection. That's how we think a lot of these blue parks can be approached, is through international treaties that already these countries have signed on to. So it's much easier because it's face saving, right? They don't have to say we are conceding something. It's saying we are actually going to do this through a mechanism that we have already agreed to because of our international multilateral obligations. And in this case, both India and Pakistan are signatories to the Ramsar Convention. And it would be very appropriate for them to say there is a provision under the Ramsar Convention that there will be transboundary wetlands and there would be support provided for transboundary wetlands. So on the Pakistani side, this is already a Ramsar site. On the Indian side, is not a Ramsar site, but it could very well be designated one. And so if that were to happen, it could be positioned as a Ramsar transboundary wetland, and arrangements could be made in terms of resolving the dispute by saying that, okay, this is a Ramsar transboundary park, and we will allow this space for science conservation and science diplomacy, and we just put the dispute in abeyance. It becomes irrelevant to some degree. And it's sort of like Antarctica, no country that claims Antarctic territory has relinquished its claim. Right? There are 11 countries which claim territory on Antarctica. Amazingly, the US is not one of them, but it has a lot of bases there for sure. But those countries have said we put our claims in abeyance. And we will basically just cooperate for the basis of science. So the same kind of approach can be used. And I think that could be a very good model for these kind of blue parks in contested areas. The other area I've been involved in that's relevant is with one of my PhD students who has now finished his PhD happily, and that is in looking at these border zones where there was infrastructure built around water and how that could be a means of fostering cooperation. And one example is the Armenian-Turkish border, and we published this paper a few years ago, and Mehmet Altıngoz, my PhD graduate, he's now working for the government of Turkey. So he's actually working very much in transboundary water cooperation space. And Turkey also hosts the Black Sea Cooperation Organization. And currently with the Ukraine conflicts, the Black Sea is particularly important. There is an organization for cooperation. We can't make the whole Black Sea a park, but at the same time, the model has much potential. But these dams were built during the Soviet period. They were called friendship dams. There are a lot of them in different border zones between the former Soviet republics. And in this case, there's one on the Armenian-Turkish border. And we looked at how cooperation has continued, even though Turkey and Armenia have abysmal relations with each other for different reasons. So that's another area which we're looking at. So I'll stop there so we can move on. But that's kind of the space we should be focusing on, I think, and I hope that will motivate some questions and discussion.
Dr. Mackelworth, why don't you share your introductory views about marine transboundary conservation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. It's very difficult to follow Saleem, considering that actually his Peace Parks book was the one that led me in this direction. So thank you for your time. I'm a marine biologist, or historically marine biologist, now geographer, working in Croatia, originally obviously from the UK. You can probably tell from my accent. And I've been working on marine protected areas, marine spatial planning for the last 2 decades in Croatia. One of the reasons why I started looking at peace parks and transboundary conservation was the dispute that was between Slovenia and Croatia over a small part of the water up in the northern Adriatic. And this became a pretty significant issue as Croatia looked to accede into the European Union. It became a very hot political potato. And yet at local level, it was considered to be something of relatively little importance because the local communities shared these resources. So that was where I started off. And then I'm just going to share my screen with a couple of slides. Let me just, okay. Do you see that? So my interest has always been marine conservation. And one of the important things about marine, I think, even more so than terrestrial, is the connectivity. So when we talk about marine conservation, when we talk about marine resources, when we talk about biodiversity or climate change or pollution, all of these have connectivity that often doesn't exist, at least not as much in terrestrial systems. So this connectivity means that if we're looking at particularly large scale areas of conservation, then invariably we're talking about transboundary processes. If we're talking about transboundary processes, then we're talking about cooperating with our neighbors. And this then becomes increasingly important on how the relationship is between the two states. As I said previously, working in Croatia and looking initially at the Slovenian issue, it became clear that actually the issue was of relatively little importance at local level. When we look at the 2030 targets that are coming in from the Convention on Biological Diversity, we're looking at conserving 30%. Target 3 looks at conserving 30% of terrestrial, inland, water, coastal and marine areas by 2030. But perhaps more importantly, Target 3 goes on to talk about how do we effectively conserve these areas, how do we effectively manage them, and how do we equitably govern these systems. So one thing that we need to be aware of is that whilst we have a number of 30% by 2030, we also have to look at how are these going to be effectively managed. And this is where my research has been taking me, basically. In 2008, the CBD released a series of criteria to look at what we call EPSAs, ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. And these were initially offshore deep sea waters, but also evolved actually to look at territorial seas, exclusive economic zones, and potentially inland internal waters of a state. We can now see that there are 300 EPSAs that have been identified worldwide. And in my region that I work in, the Mediterranean, we have actually 15. Initially, there were 17, but now there are 15. There was one area around the Alboran Sea, which is of significant importance, but was taken away due to political discussions. But one of the things that we can see with all of these areas is, and what is pretty consistent from a biological perspective, is that all of these areas have been identified and recognized by the signatory states of the Barcelona Convention. The Barcelona Convention is the convention, the Regional Seas Convention, which looks at the management of the Mediterranean Sea. One particular site that I've been looking at and just recently published a paper in Marine Policy is what we call the Southern Adriatic Ionian Strait EPSA. And this area is extremely important for different species moving in and out through this dynamic area of the Otranto Strait. And you can see that this area, whilst the EPSA is not specifically designed as a marine protected area, it's an area that's been consistently identified by the states as extremely important for ecological processes and biological diversity. And within those areas, you can see on the left-hand side the different jurisdictions that this area covers, which includes high seas, exclusive economic zones, territorial seas, and even in the inland waters of Albania. In the negotiation and looking at the development of a potential governance system, looking at this, we were looking at what are the bilateral and multilateral frameworks that are in place. And one of those being the Barcelona Convention, which has a similar caveat, what we call a conservation caveat, to the Antarctic region. It has this caveat that says that we can look at conservation and coordination without having any impacts on the potential jurisdictions of those areas. So the Barcelona Convention has copied the Antarctic caveats. The other thing is that we have, of course, the European Union working quite heavily in this region. The European Union's strategy for the Adriatic-Ionian region has been an important framework looking at this. And of course, when we talk about environmental cooperation, we also need to think about the economic aspects of cooperation as well as the biodiversity. And so with that, I would like to pass the screen back to James and say thank you, and I welcome any questions. Thanks.
Very good. And Dr. Fine, will you speak to the role of science diplomacy in the Transnational Red Sea Center?
I think you're on mute, sorry.
Dr. Fine?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. Just share again and say hi again. And I'll be presenting my story in the Red Sea, which is focused around coral reefs, something out of any conflict you would expect. However, in the Red Sea, and particularly in the Gulf of Aqaba, this is something that is not that easy to manage and conserve. And in general, looking at coral reefs, obviously we're looking at one of the most important ecosystems on Earth, providing food, coastal protection, livelihood, cultural assets, and of course a lot of biodiscovery aspects. I tend to say that the health of future generations is highly dependent on the health of reefs of the world, because of the many secrets that these reefs hold, from pharmaceutical products to many other ideas that we just have to look down there and be able to mimic if we are to have a future on this planet. However, these ecosystems are on the brink of collapse, primarily because of climate change, but also more local disturbances, as I'll mention shortly. And so if we will be on the at the current trajectory, we're likely to see reefs disappear within our lifetime. And that's very sad. We've lost 50% of all coral reefs of the world so far within the last 30 years. And at the current trajectory, we'll probably see 99% go by 2050. 2024, for example, was one of the most devastating years for coral reefs, with huge bleaching, coral bleaching and mortality in the Great Barrier Reef, the iconic Great Barrier Reef of Australia, but also elsewhere, including the Indo-Pacific. And this, of course, makes us wonder what can be done about it. One thing, of course, is mitigate carbon emissions. This is the most immediate and trivial thing to do, and also looking for places that have a better chance of survival. And this is where my environment or location comes into play, because we've found that in the Red Sea, unlike other places, and particularly in the northern Red Sea, corals are highly resilient to elevated seawater temperatures. So the Red Sea is warming up, and the Gulf of Aqaba is warming at a greater rate than the global trend. Yes, yet corals are highly resilient. Corals will usually bleach and die at temperatures of 1 to 2 degrees above the summer maximum anywhere else, but the Gulf of Aqaba, where they will bleach at 6 degrees above the summer maximum. So this is a major gap and kind of an insurance policy for our reefs for many more years if we only allowed them. This is mainly because they underwent a kind of an evolutionary selection upon entering the Red Sea following the last glacial maximum. So entering the Red Sea, they had to first settle in this very warm environment in the southern Red Sea, where seawater temperature during summer reach 33, 34 degrees, but in only the ones that survived it and reached sexual maturity, reproduced, and in a stepping stone manner reached the northern part of the Red Sea, live there today at 7 degrees below what they were selected for. So it's really an amazing opportunity. The problem is that in our experiments with many of our colleagues, we're finding that local disturbances, and the list, this is only a partial list of what we can find in the water, from oil pollution to sewage discharge, herbicides, pesticides, eutrophication, it's all there, and this is decreasing the thermal resilience, or compromises the thermal resilience, which makes it very clear if we are to conserve these reefs, so the coral reef refuge, the Gulf of Aqaba, we should eradicate or at least minimize dramatically the list of pollutants and disturbances, the local disturbances. Done by a single country, definitely not Israel, with its 14 kilometers of coastline, nor Jordan. 27, not even the bigger players. It has to be done in coordination, in collaboration, if we will be wise enough to do so, to collaborate and, for example, make the Gulf of Aqaba a World Heritage Site. We are going to have the largest coral reef refuge in the world, and provide some hope, which I think it's there. It's an amazing opportunity for hope and livelihood for millions of people in the region and beyond. Thank you.
Yeah. And Dr. Vu Hai Dong, you inform us briefly about the potential of MPAs in the South China Sea and the possible impact on peace building.
Give me a few seconds. I'll try to share the screen, please. Chair, can you hear me well and see me well?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. There are certain things in this world can be easily comparable. For example, between crocodile and alligator, between turtle and tortoise, and between me and the chair. However, how can we compare between two marine regions? For instance, how can we compare between the South China Sea and the Mediterranean? First, both marine regions have very high biodiversity. For the Mediterranean, it has 17,000 species, 28% of which are endemic, and it has a variety of habitats such as seagrass meadows, wetlands and lagoons, estuaries, and rocky coasts. For the South China Sea, it has 11,000 species, 12% of the world's mangrove forests, and 34% of the world's coral reef. It is also one of the most important fishing zones in the world. If I'm not mistaken, it ranks fourth in all fishing zones in the world in terms of marine capture productivity. And both marine regions are facing similar threats to the marine environment. For the Mediterranean is habitat loss and destruction, overfishing, marine pollution, and climate change. For the South China Sea, it habitat loss and degradation, which is the same thing. Unsustainable exploitation of marine living resources, which is a longer way to say overfishing. Pollution of the aquatic environment, which is also a longer way to say marine pollution. And sea level rising, which is a consequence of climate change. And both marine regions are having a lot of hot conflicts. For the Mediterranean, it's the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Aegean Sea dispute between Greece and Turkey, and the Cyprus Island dispute. For the South China Sea, is the Taiwan Strait, Spratly Island dispute, and Paracel Island dispute. All those disputes, I think, in our lifetime will not be resolved, so we have to live with them. But the good thing is, in both marine regions, coastal countries have been able to cooperate to designate marine protected areas despite conflicts at sea. So for the Mediterranean, the coastal countries have been able to sign the Special Protected Areas and Biodiversity Protocol, and they have established a list of special protected areas of Mediterranean importance. For the South China Sea, they have designated South China Sea Strategic Action Plan priority sites, which is under the South China Sea Strategic Action Plan Implementation Project, and the South China Sea Fishery Refugia sites, which is under the South China Sea Fisheries Refugia Project. Now, what lessons we can learn from the process of cooperation to protect the marine environment from both regions? First, environmental protection in general and marine protected areas in particular could be a non-sensitive area of cooperation in sea areas with conflicts. So those are usually areas where coastal countries can easily agree upon than other areas of cooperation. Second, non-prejudice clauses and measures are very crucial. So if the claimant states in a disputed area feel that their claims are not threatened, they are more willing to cooperate. International organizations can play an important role broker for cooperation. In both the South China Sea and the Mediterranean, UNEP play a very important role to push for regional cooperation for environmental protection and for marine protected areas. In addition to UNEP, we can also rely on international organizations such as FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, or IMO, the International Maritime Organization. And last but not least, science and scientists should lead the cooperation. In order to have marine protected areas established, we need science. And in order to have cooperation in marine protected areas, scientists should play the primary role in leading cooperation instead of politicians. So to conclude, do you believe in fairy tale? Me, I don't, but I really hope that the South China Sea and the Mediterranean can happily live together forever after with peace and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, in our presentations so far, it's clear that we cannot separate science and policy, and particularly as it applies to, let's call them the marine peace parks or blue parks. But is there a diplomatic route to encourage nations to honestly discuss the possibilities of establishing these shared blue parks or peace parks? And in that question, what is the role of science diplomacy to bring these nations together? And perhaps each of you would respond to that question, beginning with Dr. Ali. Thank you.
Well, you know, with all of the various multilateral environmental agreements, there is a science component. We have either it is through a specific panel, in the case of the Climate Change Convention, we have the IPCC, we have in the Biodiversity Convention, the IPBES, and then also with the Global Environment Facility, which is the fund that supports all the major environmental treaties, there's a science panel as well, of which I've actually served as a member. So there is an opportunity to bring in science into these discussions between the countries through that mechanism. We also have the UN Environment Assembly, which is a gathering place for environmental ministers mostly, that convenes every 3 years under the UN Environment Program. So those are institutional ways in which we could try to push this. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much political leadership or investment of political capital, one might say, to move that forward. So there are provisions within the CBD for transboundary aspects. We have IUCN has the World Commission on Protected Areas, which many of us have been members, and but it's very light touch. There isn't that drive to say, okay, let's just move this forward and have something institutionalized. So I think where there is hope is really where we're seeing increasingly some of the data sharing for particular kind of crisis management. There's always much more chance that you will get some kind of cooperation because of those kinds of issues. So if there's a pollution issue around a lake, for example, you get much more chance for cooperation than if you have downstream upstream riparian concerns where the upstream power has much greater authority. So,
Peter, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I agree. My only concern is that when we talk about global policies, is their application down at regional level. And in our region, the Barcelona Convention is an extremely important regional seas convention. It was the first one in the 1970s. It has some kind of support. It's been a little bit, I would say, a little bit on the back burner for the last until about a decade ago, and in the last decade, it's suddenly found its feet again with the EBSAs, and the EBSAs are an interesting principle because they come from a global framework, let's say, and are now being applied at a regional level. And we can see other places that have been successful. For instance, the OSPAR Convention in the Atlantic have been very successful in looking at transboundary. David Johnson was one of the movers and shakers for these regional corporations. And I would say that while we have the targets at global level, we should be looking at regional scale to implement them, because actually it's at that point in time when you're face to face with somebody across a table, which doesn't often happen at global scale, but happens regularly at regional scale, that we can use the frameworks that are currently in place to actually implement what's been agreed at global level. The other thing I would say is it's not only science policy, is that it's science and society, and society is changing, and the demands of society are changing, and the recognition of society is changing. And that has had significant influence in my region, again, with the European Commission and this push for the Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy, and to look at how do we restore and return our seas to a good environmental status. So it's a link. I think it's a link of not only science policy but also science society and having those skills. And I think sometimes biologists are lacking the skills to move the science into decision makers, making life easier for decision makers as well. That's my view. Thanks.
Excellent. And Dr. Fine, now speak to the role of science diplomacy in the Transnational Red Sea Center, perhaps.
Yeah, so I think for us it was very clear that we need to, in order to conserve and secure the Gulf of Aqaba as a coral reef refuge, we need good science, we need diplomacy, and the Swiss government in this case facilitated the diplomacy for science, science for diplomacy, allowing us to act under the Transnational Red Sea Center for generating the right data, the right science on a collaborative effort with our neighbors. And I think this is the only way we could operate jointly with our neighbors to generate that data. So for us, science was also practical peacemaking, but it was, first of all, very important to generate the data. The peace building was a bonus in this case. Nowadays, with the development of more technology, I believe that open science is also a way to bring together, especially in regions with low-income countries and more wealthier countries, to share data, share conservation efforts by sharing everything, basically. And we've deployed some tools for that in the Gulf of Aqaba. So I really believe that science is there. It's a must, but it also supports peace building.
Thank you. Dr. Vuhai Dang, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what signs we see in the contested South China Sea for any kind of marine science cooperation. We've been reading for the past year about the Philippines and Vietnam once again moving forward with some joint exploration, but nothing has become of that. Also, in the past 2 years, China has held a number of cooperative marine science programs. How does that, foretell any potential for the role of science diplomacy in the South China Sea?
Thank you, Mr. Borton. I think English poet had said that if there is a will, there will be a way. The most important thing is whether or not the countries in the region want to move forward to do cooperation, and especially cooperation in marine science. There have been a lot of calls from many parties, from many scientists, and also from many scholars to push forward for marine scientific research cooperation in the South China Sea. And there had been many initiatives in that way, but they have not been sustained. For example, the Dome Strait that you told us earlier about between Vietnam and the Philippines. And yes, now Vietnam and the Philippines are discussing how to move forward. The problem is, how can we sustain the political will to undertake cooperation in science? Because we need science, everyone knows that, and we need cooperation in scientific research in order to have a better understanding of our sea, have a better understanding of our marine living resources. But whether or not our politicians, our government would think that is the priority for them to push for scientific research cooperation, that is another issue. So I think if we can have all the coastal states in the South China Sea to agree to push forward for cooperation, especially cooperation in marine scientific research, I'm sure we can find a way to make it happen. But for the time being, if there's a lack of political will, I don't think anything could happen soon. Thank you.
All right. Since all of you represent different geographic regions, I deliberately or purposely tried to frame some open-ended questions here, but it seems, how is it possible for nations to kind of overcome their own national interest to pursue conservation as a common goal so we can, the end game, achieve peacekeeping? So I go back to Dr. Ali to maybe take a look at that question and frame that for us. So thank you.
Yes, so thank you. No, I think the best way to get cooperation in these contexts is to convey what, in game theory we call the dilemma of common aversion, which is that if you get people to realize that not cooperating is going to leave them worse off, then they're more likely to cooperate. A lot of that is around, you shift the focus from sharing a finite resource and like fisheries, for example, in the context of blue parks, and converting it into a question about, well, if we don't cooperate, it's going to be depleted, and then neither of us are going to have it, and it'll be a race to the bottom. So how to frame that in a policy context using science to convince policymakers, I think that's the best way to do it. And that's where we have seen cooperation, whether it's with fisheries agreements or agreements over pollution, And I totally agree with Peter that the regional scale in terms of operationalizing can be more effective. The challenge is that many times when it's just two countries that are in conflict, then the regional aspect also doesn't play out. The Mediterranean has been generally effective. I mean, there's a whole book about the Mediterranean Action Plan that Peter Haas wrote. It's a classic, Saving the Mediterranean. And there he brought up also this notion of epistemic communities, which is that you work with communities of knowledge that are created through civil society and other mechanisms, and those can then very organically help to foster cooperation also.
Very good. Dr. Mackelworth, do you want to weigh in?
It's always very difficult to follow Saleem, honestly. I would agree with him. I mean, fundamentally, when we talk about nation states, apart from a very few nation states, they've only existed, 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, let's say. Inherently, communities were built around mutual resources, and inherently these communities, whether they're based at different boundaries, which are political boundaries that are in many instances arbitrary. If we're looking at cooperation across, let's say, open borders rather than very defended, very militarized borders, then we can see that there are opportunities for local communities, and that local community support for conservation or let's say natural resource management, even as Saleem was saying, it's a balance of recognizing that if we work together, we'll benefit together. And I think that sometimes that comes down to actually a little bit of common sense from the local communities that have been working for generations across arbitrary borders that have sprung up. And this is absolutely an example that you can see in Croatia, the ex-Yugoslavia from the 1990s and previously, and yeah, it's really a case that these are very much man-made borders, and prior to the Westphalian system, people moved freely across them. So I think that's also important. It's also important to engage with local communities, particularly to try and find that transboundary cooperation.
Very good. Maoz, fine.
I think that the economic value incentive is very strong in the case of coral reefs. If you look at Egypt, the Egyptian government makes about $12 billion a year from their coral reefs. It's the largest reef-based economy in the world in terms of how much they make of tourism. If this resource, coral reefs, will not be managed at a regional scale, then we'll see again and again cases where an oil spill that starts in Jordan with no sufficient coordination reaches these reefs in Egypt, in Sinai, within 48 hours, damaging these reefs. So obviously, coordination is needed. Otherwise, countries that are so dependent on these reefs will suffer greatly. And it's relatively easy. I mean, reefs recognize no political borders, so does pollution. And the only way to really manage it is this collaborative effort.
Thank you. Dr. Buhai, do you want to add any more on that subject?
Thank you. In ASEAN, we have the saying, if you want to go alone, you can go faster. But if you want to go farther, you should go in group. Actually, if you have a better protected ocean, an ocean with more fish, an ocean with higher biodiversity, it will at the end add to the interest of each coastal state or each state in this world. So we have to let the countries know that if we protect the common environment, it's there for their own interest as well. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we should create, as I said earlier, mechanisms or measures of non-prejudice so that they can participate in all those cooperative mechanisms, on those cooperation partnerships initiatives without fearing that their claims, their national claims, especially claims on national sovereignty, would be affected. If they can participate in the cooperation without losing their claims, I'm sure that national governments and coastal states will be more willing to participate into those initiatives to protect the marine environment. Thank you.
Well, we're driving to the question right now that seems to predominate our overall discussion today. I mean, what steps can we take to build kind of government and general public support for the establishment of these marine peace parks? A good friend of mine, Professor John McManus, he has been, if you wish, advocating for a marine peace park in the South China Sea for over 25 years. And he's actually been diving in those waters in the South China Sea and trying to generate political movement from the communities. But in other parts of the world, how do we build the government and kind of public support for a marine peace park? And perhaps we'll start again with Dr. Ali and just go through the ranks here. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the motivation of some of these efforts, like in the South China Sea, one of my own experiences with cooperation there has been around Xiamen University in China. We have a joint PhD program with them and GIS and marine policy. And they have a joint research mission on a brand new vessel that they wanted to run in the South China Sea. And they invited American students from our university as well as Malaysians, because they also have an English speaking campus in Kuala Lumpur. And that was an amazing experience for these students, going across from Kuala Lumpur to Xiamen and, collecting data. And so I think these kinds of small efforts, sometimes they're below the radar, so to speak, quite literally as well, but they can be very powerful, and it's, you play the slow game with them. And I think that can also be the other way, which is more a sort of citizen diplomacy through science as well, even if it's not orchestrated at a national scale.
Well, very good. And was that a recent expedition?
That was just before COVID, actually. It was in 2019.
All right. Are there others that like to respond to that question?
I would just say I think there has to be an explicit recognition of the power dynamics between the countries. Quite often, agendas are pushed by one country onto another, and that's where, again, we talk about the regional dynamics or frameworks that exist either environmentally or economically. Those frameworks allow sometimes the balance of the power dynamics between countries. But it's not only the power dynamics between countries, it's also the power dynamics between sectors. So fishery, tourism, and you can often find that, we often find that tourism is an ally when we talk about conservation, because tourism recognizes that the resource base is actually everything when with regards to bringing visitors to the region. So I'm just always conscious that when we talk about transboundary, either peace parks or let's say normal transboundary areas, that we need to be explicitly recognize the power dynamics between the different players. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else on that subject? Well, I guess in terms of addressing the environmental benefits and economic benefits from the peace parks, I come back to the kind of conundrum is the obligation on the part of the government to help inform their citizens about those economic benefits, particularly in some parts of the world, particularly the South China Sea. We're seeing fisheries collapse. So there's a lot of pushback from fishermen when you're creating these marine protected areas and you're telling them not to fish. It's a no-take zone. This creates a kind of a barrier for helping generate and galvanize support for a peace park or a blue park initiative. So how do we overcome that? How do we get? I guess part of the communication link there is through what I call citizen science. You mentioned that earlier, a few of you, and getting the people to be more informed and thus communicate to their respective governments. But perhaps some of you would give me some ideas on how we can foster that kind of communication so that it becomes community-based and community-grown, and the fishermen recognize the benefits. Anyone on that?
Well, maybe I'll chime in that, with reference to making this connection between citizen aspirations and government decision making. Of course, it depends on the form of government which is prevalent in that particular country, but there is increasing opportunity for also leveraging influencers in various forms, whether it's social media influencers or other kinds of media communication channels that governments may not otherwise be as accountable, and so just that does create an impact, I think, and we should be utilizing those channels much more so. It seems a bit trite, but I think it's still underutilized in the kind of peace building realm, and certainly within the environmental peace building realm.
Anyone else on that subject?
Yeah, conservation is a crisis discipline. This has been known since the 1970s, and I think that citizens are recognizing that there is a crisis in the sea, and that crisis, again, like Saleem is saying, it's dependent on how you can get that message from the citizens into the broader media, and that depends often on the government type that you have in your region. But with everything, so we've been using a tool called Marksan, which is a spatial planning tool, which is looking at how do we protect an area which is transboundary. And we were looking at Italy, Croatia, and this area in the Southern Adriatic, and it became absolutely clear because the cost, when you look at the cost layers, when you look at the opportunity costs that will be lost when you put in some form of conservation, is that obviously conservation is moved to those areas which it's cheaper. So you will always have some kind of conservation burden that sits upon normally the less enfranchised groups. So again, it comes back to this question, I think, also again of power dynamics, of who has access to the policymakers and who has access to decision makers. And tools such as Marksan and decision support tools can allow us to kind of balance this, utilizing good science and good economic information, and it allows us to balance this kind of influence that we have on the decision makers. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Buhai, would you like to address that, and also perhaps illuminate us about the rollout and development of successful MPAs off the coast of Vietnam? Maybe that's part of that question is, I mean, how are these MPAs that are contributing to sustainable economic development? What are you seeing there off the coast of Vietnam?
First, I would like to answer the question how we can get more public support for science diplomacy. I think I have to answer for that. We need people like you who would bridge between scientists and the public. You know, the scientists, the scholars, they have the reputation to be in the Ivory Coast, in the ivory tower. They speak scientific language, which is quite difficult to understand. Sorry, Peter, I try my best to understand Maxan, but every time I try, I fail. And on the other side, you have the diplomats and the politicians who have to defend their national interest, and the public are sort of in the between. So we need people like James who would organize these kind of meetings and other initiative in order to make the public know about science diplomacy, about how important it is to have marine protected areas in the world in a more understandable language than our scholars' language. To give you an example of Vietnam, how the marine protected areas have contributed to Vietnam green economy. I give you the example of two marine protected areas which are quite well preserved in Vietnam, which is the Hạ Long Bay, a World Heritage, and it had contributed to bring a lot of international tourists to Vietnam, to contribute to our national economy and in a very sustainable way. In the past, before the Hạ Long Bay is well known, it was a place where people used to extract coal for energy. But now people have changed to more sustainable way of exploiting the resource there by using, for example, using boats to bring tourists to the bay, which is more sustainable and less resource consuming. The other example is the Cù Lao Chàm, marine protected areas where there's really a sentiment, a feeling of community-based management with green tourism and with a lot of practice which in the past were not very sustainable. Now the people who live there have been made aware of the treasure that they are having, which is the island that they are living in. So they participate to protect the island, the marine protected area, which is an island, in the best way possible. So I think those are the example of how marine protected areas can contribute to protect the marine resources and also to change people's perception about sustainability, about how to sustainably use the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll make that payment to you after the program for the endorsement. Thank you. Maoz, fine. I have to ask you this, given what is going on in the war in Gaza and how this is impacting in the Red Sea, but it seems to me that it's a very difficult time to kind of foster cooperation among, well, the countries, the different stakeholders at this time. But what promise do you see in terms of moving forward in kind of marine cooperation in Jordan, in the Red Sea, the relationships with Israel, or do we have to wait until this war is over to move forward?
Yeah, so indeed the situation is really bad, and for the environment it's bad as well, not only for people, and I'm hopeful that it will see more peaceful times soon. At the moment, in terms of the collaborative work, we are on hold. We cannot do much, but I'm hopeful that very soon these issues will be resolved. We should keep trying. First of all, keep trying to maintain the joint monitoring, joint activities that we've run so far, and it was highly successful, but I have to admit it is highly sensitive to the geopolitical situation. as scientists, conservationists, environmentalists, we have to keep trying. We have no choice if we are to secure these coral reefs, precious, unique coral reefs on a global scale. We have to, this is our duty to keep trying. And on a personal level, working together, the joint programs, we managed to do so. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for governments, but the scientists on the ground are still closely communicating in many cases.
Well, I know it's a difficult time for that part of the world and for the world in general, all of us. On a more general basis here, I keep coming back to this idea that the constraints of transboundary policy and ocean governance arrangements. If we were to create kind of a handbook for our listeners and viewers this morning, identifying what are the primary constraints for just generally transboundary policy and ocean governance arrangements. Dr. Ali has identified a few of those agreements that have been reached previously, but what are the constraints that we're addressing in transboundary policy and ocean governance arrangements?
I think the biggest constraint is really that the military establishment is often so ascendant in its ability to trump essentially any other kind of technocratic decision. And so having the military on board with any kind of transboundary matters is extremely significant. Either the military or the security forces, whatever, like in Costa Rica, they don't have an army, but they have other kinds of police forces, and they actually have had a transboundary dispute around the river which borders Nicaragua. But so the security establishment is the one that really needs to be involved in this. And I think there is some hope on that based on what I was mentioning with places like what Sandia National Labs is doing with also with the Department of Defense. But it needs to be kicked up a notch, definitely, so that these issues are high politics, not low politics.
Very good. Dr. Mackelworth, do you want to weigh in on that or add?
Yeah, the environment is always the sector that is last on the list in general. I think what we see in the Mediterranean is that we are seeing really a crisis that is unfolding in front of our eyes. So there is multiple efforts now particularly through European Union funding and also JEF funding and other organizations working in the region to start to raise this up the policy agenda. I think also with the migrant crisis in the last 5 to 10 years, environment and security has almost become a very similar issue. So a lot of the countries are looking at environmental issues almost as a security issue as well. So I think the important thing is to make environment relevant, and this has been a core theme of what we've been talking about for the last hour, is that relevance is often either economic or socio-economic. Let's put it in that perspective. We need to make it relevant to the people who are the voters, the citizens, but also the policymakers. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Dr. Vuhai Dung, do you want to add anything to that?
I think there are two big obstacles for the development of cooperation in environmental protection. The first one is, of course, money. Environmental protection is not free, especially environmental protection cooperation that require a lot of funding from third party and from the relevant countries in the sea. And second, environmental cooperation need time. Like for example, you cannot just get rid of marine pollution in 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. You need 50 years at least, 20 years. But national priorities cannot last that long. You know, national governments have to cater short-term interests of the country, short-term interests of the citizen. So yes, at some moment they can be eager to cooperate in environmental protection, but another moment they want to do something else. So they stop to put resources into those cooperation. Like for example, the Red Sea Marine Pact between Israel and Jordan, it lasted for 10 years. It lasted for 10 years and it contributed to enhanced cooperation between the two countries in the Red Sea. But after 10 years, because of lack of funding, because of the conflict in the region, it stopped. Unfortunately, it was one of the most talk about initiative of marine peace pact in the world in the last 10 years. That is quite a long time. However, it wasn't enough to save the marine environment with 10 years. So I think the two biggest obstacles to cooperation in environmental protection is a long-term cooperation, and second is funding. If we can get rid of those, especially with the role of international organizations, I think we can sustain cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going online and reading some of the questions that have come in from our audience. Let me just read this for all. I think that international organizations are also interested in being involved and supporting, especially from a peace and security angle. But how do we, as international organizations, also provide support when we do not necessarily have scientific expertise, but we do work with policymakers? Do you, as experts, also do outreach to international organizations? And what does that dialogue there look like? So that's for all of you to respond to this attendee. Thank you. Dr. Ali?
Yes, I mean, I think the key is the institutions themselves need to have scientists on their staff more so. I mean, this is happening to some degree with a few organizations, but there is this kind of outsourcing of science, which is often not as effective, because if you have people with scientific capability within the organization, it's usually a much better outcome. So that would be one idea.
Dr. Mackelworth.
Yeah, I think that, so I work with quite a lot of different groups. So I work on a few committees for EU strategies and for the Barcelona Convention. And whenever I'm asked for data information, I try and make it available as much as I can, depending on the funding sources. But I think what is core is actually having an interdisciplinary group. You know, we can have as much biology as we like, but ultimately getting people to change minds is often more about human dimensions than it is about biological data. Invariably, we have enough data, and we have to work in the principles of uncertainty, particularly in the marine environment, which is alien, and connectivity and all of these different aspects. We will always be looking for data. So at some point, we need to be able to turn around and say, okay, we have enough data, and we have enough surrogates for ecosystem-based management, so that we can make those decisions. And it's actually getting, providing that data to the international organizations in a means that was previously said, in a means that is digestible. And that means that not talking from a perspective of different abundance and distribution data, or starting to talk about confidence intervals or these different things. It's being able to talk to decision makers in a way that they understand what's going on. I think that's core, particularly for the international organizations. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Fine.
I think we never have enough data, Peter. We always need to get more. We still don't fully understand these ecosystems, but I do agree that at the same time we have to convey the messages, the key messages to international organizations. For example, what we have conveyed to UNESCO was for the purpose of trying to make the Gulf Aqaba a World Heritage Site, a joint World Heritage Site, and the data came from scientists on the ground, regional and international scientists. So I think the role of international organizations critical, as well as so-called neutral entities who can assist the locals to sit to the same table and bring the data, the important data, and make eventually a policy with it. Thanks.
And Dr. Buhaidan?
Thank you. I would say that without international relations, there will be no environmental cooperation, environmental protection cooperation. Look at the Mediterranean. The Barcelona Convention was able to happen is thanks to UNEP. Same thing in my region, in Southeast Asia. Many environmental protection cooperation projects have been able thanks to a lot of international organizations. Like, for example, the International Maritime Organization, for example, the GEF, for example, UNEP. So international organizations have always been playing a very important role in keeping our ocean blue and in preserving our peace, our sustainability. Now, in our times, the role of international organizations has been downplayed a little bit. So some people say UN has not been able to prevent war, UNEP has not been able to prevent marine environmental pollution, etc. However, without those international organizations, the world would be a much worse place. So I think international organizations have been playing a very important role. Maybe what you can improve is to have, now I think we have around 300 international organizations around the world. So if between the international organizations, you can cooperate together to have a much better, much stronger leverage on solving some world common issues like the pollution of the marine environment, that would be much more effective. I think so. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, we've been at this for about nearly an hour and a half, and I really want to thank, first of all, Carl Brook and the Environmental Peacebuilding Association for this opportunity to share these views. And I am very, very grateful to our distinguished panelists for your very valuable contributions and your time in all parts of the world. I remain hopeful about the promise of marine protected areas and the development of peace parks in all parts of the world. And I think that the public at large are very interested in what is unfolding in terms of our ocean crisis. And so it behooves the scientists like yourself to connect with those international organizations and with the public, and we can make a difference. So I'm thankful for your valuable time, and I hope to stay in touch with you. We're signing off now. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
James. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, James.